The death of another rock musician was disclosed today. Jim Morrison, 27 years old, lead singer of The Doors. His manager said Morrison died 6 days ago in Paris, either of a heart attack or pneumonia. But the death was kept secret to avoid a sensation. He was buried in Paris in the same cemetery where Balzac and other French immortals lie.
For over 5 decades, the story of Jim Morrison's death has lingered like the last note of a Doors song, haunting, unresolved, and shrouded in shadows. Officially, he died young, wild, and poetic in a Paris bathtub. But was that really the final verse of his life? Or just the intro to a deeper, stranger story? Now, new revelations stir the silence. From unexplained documents to one cryptic number hidden in a lover's box, a theory has emerged that could finally bring clarity, or crack the mystery wide open again. What if the ending we've all accepted was never meant to be the truth? Step beyond the myth and into the labyrinth of whispers, lost records, and eerie coincidences. Are you ready to open the door? Jim Morrison's transient lifestyle. Raised in a strict military household, Morrison experienced a nomadic childhood, moving frequently due to his father's Navy career. This transient lifestyle deeply influenced his creative mind, embedding in him themes of freedom, rebellion, and existential exploration that would later appear in his lyrics and poetry. Morrison studied film at UCLA, where he met Ray Manzarek. Their shared artistic vision laid the foundation for what would become The Doors, completed by guitarist Robbie Krieger and drummer John Densmore. The Doors emerged in 1965 and rapidly became one of the defining bands of the psychedelic rock era. Morrison's baritone voice, provocative lyrics, and electric stage presence helped elevate the band to stardom. Hits like Light My Fire, Break On Through to the Other Side, and Riders on the Storm became generational anthems, blending blues, rock, and poetry into a unique sound that challenged mainstream norms. Morrison, often shirtless and clad in leather pants, became a symbol of counterculture rebellion and sexual freedom. His performances were theatrical and unpredictable, frequently pushing boundaries of what was acceptable in live music at the time. As fame grew, so did his notoriety. The closer Morrison came to be with the media and law, the greater these spirals became. He was accused of exposing himself on stage during a concert in Miami in March 1969, a charge that would trail him for years. The myriad accounts of the events aside, Morrison was found guilty of indecent exposure and profanity in 1970, the grounds for which he was appealing at the time of his death. The legal problems and publicity brought a lot of wear and tear, not only on him, but also on his mental disposition. Consequently, it did surface reports of Morrison behaving quite erratically, and at the same time, increasingly leaning toward unapologetic heavy drinking, with his bandmates and industry members growing even more distant. In early 1971, with his image in tatters, decaying health visible, Morrison flew to Paris with Pamela Corson, a longtime partner. Not wanting to put himself under the stresses of stardom, he would go back to writing. Paris was seen as a den for many high poets and writers that fast inspired him, like Baudelaire and Rimbaud. There he lightened the soul, began writing, and contemplated. Tragically, his search for peace was to be cut short months down the line. However, his contributions to the arts in his short life still echo, immortalizing him as a tragic legend and the voice of reality for the 1960s counterculture. But behind the poetry and fame, Morrison's final chapter would unfold in a place far from the stage and darker than most expected: the move to Paris. In March 1971, Jim Morrison relocated to Paris with his longtime girlfriend Pamela Corson, seeking refuge from the mounting pressures of fame, legal troubles, and personal demons. At the time, Morrison was facing a 6-month prison sentence for indecent exposure and profanity stemming from the infamous 1969 Miami concert, though he was out on bail pending appeal. Disillusioned with the rock world and eager to focus on his poetry, Morrison viewed Paris, a city steeped in literary and artistic history, as a potential sanctuary. He idolized French poets like Baudelaire and Rimbaud, and hoped the cultural landscape of Paris would offer the creative solitude he craved. While the Doors continued without him in the U.S., Morrison attempted to embrace a more anonymous life in Paris. He spent his days reading, writing, visiting cafes, and exploring the city's bohemian neighborhoods. However, accounts from friends and observers indicate that Morrison's efforts to clean up were inconsistent at best. Though he had expressed a desire to get sober, he remained deeply entangled in substance use. Corson, who was addicted to heroin, reportedly continued using the substance while in Paris, often with friends in their apartment. Morrison, initially known for his aversion to heroin and fear of needles, became increasingly involved, allegedly experimenting with the substance, whether willingly or accidentally. Based on a meticulous exposé by The Guardian and interviews with people close to the couple, the days leading to Morrison's death were filled with a disturbing blend of apparently routine activities and deteriorating health complaints. On the night before Morrison's death, Corson said they went to the movies, had Chinese food, and came back to inject heroin. Somewhere in the early morning hours of July 3, 1971, Morrison started to have severe breathing problems. Corson did not call for help right away, but put him in a bathtub, perhaps in an attempt to revive him before passing out. She awoke to find Morrison unresponsive and frantically called a friend. In spite of the grim circumstances, the French authorities refused to conduct an autopsy, citing an absence of evidence for foul play. He was officially stated to have died of heart failure, possibly aggravated by excessive drinking. The haste with which the investigation was carried out and the lack of forensic assessment have caused many to question whether Morrison really did find the peace in Paris he sought, or whether the move was merely an attempt to escape life that had become untenable. While some believe Paris offered Morrison a shot at redemption, others view it as a slow-motion tragedy that ended just as it began to unfold. The official cause of death. Jim Morrison was officially declared dead on July 3, 1971, in Paris, at the age of 27. French authorities determined that he died of heart failure, listing it as natural causes on his death certificate. According to reports at the time, Morrison was found unresponsive in the bathtub of his apartment in the Marais district. The initial medical opinion attributed the heart failure possibly to excessive alcohol use, but with no signs of violence or physical trauma, officials did not consider further investigation necessary. The doctor who reportedly signed the certificate, Dr. Max Vasile, could not later be located for clarification, and French officials chose not to conduct an autopsy. The lack of a forensic examination quickly became a point of contention. Despite Morrison's international fame and the sudden nature of his passing, authorities opted for a rapid and quiet burial. He was interred just 4 days later at Père Lachaise Cemetery, among the ranks of Paris's most esteemed poets and artists. His coffin was sealed, and only a handful of people attended the brief funeral ceremony. For a figure of Morrison's stature, the subdued handling of his death struck many as unusual and sparked widespread interest from the press and fans alike. A toxicology report completely wrote off biological evidence that could have otherwise confirmed any such possibility. Thus, official documents, along with any substance involvement and suspicious behavior, were left unmentioned. Many would strain to understand how a man in his 20s, without any heart condition known to the public, could suddenly die under otherwise ordinary circumstances. No records were publicized because no autopsy was performed, and the French authorities effectively closed the case only a few days later after his death. The thing is, this left the official narrative wide open for challenge. Over time, this minuscule nature of the investigation drew criticism from even scholars and journalists, aside from fans. Many referred to Morrison's death as a procedural failure from very early on, especially in light of the public's interest and Morrison's iconic status. Such a lack of transparency and thoroughness yields fertile grounds for speculation. And thus, for the long decades since then, the official cause of death heart failure has not been regarded as a final certainty, but merely the beginning of a much deeper mystery. Discrepancies in Pamela Corson's accounts. Central to the growing skepticism around Jim Morrison's death are the inconsistent statements made by his girlfriend, Pamela Corson, who was the only known person present during his final hours. In her earliest account, Corson told friends and emergency responders that Morrison had simply fallen ill, gone to take a bath, and died in his sleep. However, as time passed, her versions of the events began to diverge significantly, with details changing depending on whom she spoke to. These contradictions cast doubt on the official narrative and make her reliability as a witness a key issue in the ongoing debate. Corson's later statements included references to substance use, particularly heroin. At times, she claimed that Morrison had snorted heroin with her that night, possibly mistaking it for cocaine. In other accounts, she insisted it was his first time trying the substance, while in some versions, she completely denied that heroin played any role in his death. These fluctuations were particularly troubling given Morrison's public aversion to heroin. He was reportedly afraid of needles and often spoke out against the substance. Corson's shifting explanations made it increasingly difficult to determine what had truly occurred that night in their Paris apartment. People close to the couple have since come forward, including Morrison's photographer Alain Ronay and Morrison's other acquaintances, to suggest that she might have been using heroin during their Paris days regularly and could have introduced it to Morrison's setup. The closeness of her relationship with the known heroin dealer Jean de Brtoy further deepened the suspicions. Such alternatives brought into question whether Morrison had, either intentionally or accidentally, been stumbling into a lump of very potent heroin that night. That Corson's inconsistent testimony would then be formed to protect her or others. The situation was made infinitely worse by Pamela C. being declared a heroin overdose in 1974, thus closing the direct testimony route to trace any happenings on the Morrison death. To add to that misfortune, Morrison would never have an autopsy performed on him. With Corson's own credibility being increasingly questioned, her changing accounts now form a cornerstone of the entire mystery. Many see her accounts not only as unreliable, but as a major reason Morrison's death remains cloaked in doubt, speculation, and endless intrigue. The Rock and Roll Circus Club. The Rock and Roll Circus nightclub in Paris plays a central role in one of the most controversial alternative theories about Jim Morrison's death. In 2007, Sam Burnett, the club's former manager, published a memoir that challenged the long-held belief that Morrison died peacefully in his apartment. Burnett claimed that Morrison visited the club late on July 2, 1971, and spent time in the bathroom, where he was later found slumped over a toilet. According to Burnett, Morrison showed classic signs of a heroin overdose, including blood and foam at the mouth. His sudden collapse in the club's restroom directly contradicted the official story, which placed his death at home. Burnett alleged that rather than contacting emergency services, club staff allegedly under pressure from outside associates, opted to remove Morrison's body discreetly. He claimed that two unidentified men transported the unresponsive singer from the club to his apartment, hoping to avoid police scrutiny and protect the club's reputation. The plan was to stage the scene in a way that made it appear Morrison had died alone, at home, in privacy. This act of concealment, if true, represented not just a cover-up, but a deliberate manipulation of the death scene to mislead authorities and the public. The nightclub theory has received substantial acceptance through corroborative accounts. Two witnesses who were connected with the deceased within the circle and outside confirmed parts of Burnett's story. Photographer Patrick Chauvel said that he helped carry Morrison's body to the car. Singer Marianne Faithfull said later that he believed Morrison overdosed on heroin at the club. These further strengthen the idea, borne out by non-state sources, that Morrison's last minutes were much more chaotic and much less private than the official record suggests. The very club of the rock and roll circus has come to punctuate ambiguity in Morrison's death. This is the locus of reality, rumor, and reputations that elapses in the early hours of July 3rd. The French authorities had no reason to reopen the inquiry to entertain this version of events. Burnett's story, however, lends itself to intrigue by fans and historians alike. The very same club, which had been a setting for the brutally vibrant rock scene in Paris, now lives in legend as a possibly real venue to one of the most mythologized deaths in rock history. As the night's secrets unraveled, an even more dangerous figure stepped into focus: the role of Jean de Brtoy. Jean de Brtoy, a French count and socialite deeply entrenched in the 1960s jet set and rock star circles, has emerged as a controversial figure in many posthumous examinations of Jim Morrison's death. Known for distributing high-grade heroin to artists and celebrities, de Brtoy's name frequently surfaces in narratives linking him to fatal overdoses. At the time of Morrison's death, de Brtoy was romantically involved with Pamela Corson, adding another layer of entanglement to the events in Paris. His status as both Corson's lover and supplier put him in close proximity to the tragedy that unfolded. De Brtoy's connection to the heroin said to be involved in Morrison's death has been widely cited by both insiders and journalists. According to accounts from individuals like Sam Burnett and Marianne Faithfull, de Brtoy's Moroccan-sourced heroin was particularly strong, so potent that it had already been implicated in multiple accidental overdoses. Faithfull later claimed she felt a deep sense of dread the night de Brtoy went to meet Morrison, suggesting he was directly responsible for supplying the fatal dose, even if unintentionally. While she described the event as an accident, her implication was clear. De Brtoy's role in Morrison's death was not just peripheral. The entire character of de Brtoy supports different suspicions. He was known to somehow percolate through the elite with little interrogation, defended by his aristocracy. After Morrison's death, reports say that de Brtoy left Paris in a hurry, went back to Morocco, and, only several weeks later in June 1971, died there of a heroin overdose. His untimely passing left no time for further questioning or accountability. Regardless of the extent of de Brtoy's involvement in any cover-up, he remains an enigmatic character who will forever retain characteristically gray standing in Morrison's later days because of this swift departure and his sudden death. Even today, the legacy of Jean de Brtoy is inextricably linked to the underbelly of the rock scene in the 1970s, filled with genius and self-destruction. He lived and died to remind us of the treacherous alliances among creativity, addiction, and unbridled privilege. While never formally charged, de Brtoy continues to arise in the context of every significant inquiry, documentary, or biography touching on the mysterious passing of Morrison. To some, he is not merely a character in this story. Rather, he is considered a possible trigger for its tragic ending. Inconsistencies and lack of autopsy. The absence of an autopsy following Jim Morrison's sudden death has long been one of the most controversial aspects of the case, and a key reason why conspiracy theories continue to flourish. When Morrison was found unresponsive in the bathtub of his Paris apartment on July 3, 1971, French authorities quickly ruled his death due to natural causes, specifically heart failure potentially worsened by alcohol consumption. Despite his celebrity status and the sudden, unexplained nature of his death at just 27 years old, no post-mortem examination was conducted. The reasoning, according to officials, was the lack of evidence of foul play. However, this decision left a significant void in forensic evidence and sparked decades of speculation. Without an autopsy or toxicology report, any possibility of definitively understanding what caused Morrison's death vanished. The sealed coffin, hastily arranged funeral, and the fact that only 5 people reportedly attended the service added further suspicion. Many fans and observers were alarmed by how little scrutiny was applied to the death of one of the era's most famous musicians. Adding to the mystery, the physician who signed the death certificate, Dr. Max Vasile, became untraceable in the years that followed, leaving some to question whether proper medical protocols were followed at all. The misstatements that Pamela Corson made kept adding to the fire. Her constantly conflicting accounts of the night Morrison died, which varied from saying he was using heroin to claiming he was on the wrong substances and then completely denying that substances were involved at all, made it harder and harder to separate fact from fiction. Given the lack of medical evidence, her story was made one of the few sources for understanding what might have happened. Because she was a known heroin user with reputed links to Jean de Brtoy, there has been endless discussion about possible motivations she might have had for hiding the truth or creating a more socially acceptable version. Ultimately, the lack of a formal investigation allowed for all possible alternative hypotheses, from accidental heroin overdose at the rock and roll Circus nightclub to the ridiculous premise that Morrison faked his own death. That the majority of the main participants, Morrison, Corson, de Brtoy, have now all also passed on only complicates the long-standing mystery. Short of new forensic evidence or credible first-hand accounts, the real cause of his death may always remain unknown, suspended forever in speculation and myth. However, it is the same vagueness that helped sustain his legend and mystery more than 5 decades later. Theories of survival and identity change. Among the most enduring and provocative theories surrounding Jim Morrison's death is the claim that he faked it in order to escape the pressures of fame and reinvent himself in anonymity. This notion, long dismissed as conspiracy lore, has resurfaced with renewed vigor thanks to the 2025 docuseries Before the End, Searching for Jim Morrison. Directed by Doors superfan Jeff Finn, the 3-part series explores inconsistencies in the official narrative, including the lack of an autopsy, the rapid burial, and the sealed coffin, elements that some believe point to a staged death. Morrison, disenchanted with celebrity life and facing legal trouble in the U.S., had openly fantasized about disappearing and living a quiet life devoted to writing. The series centers on a man referred to as Frank X, a New York-based maintenance worker who bears a striking resemblance to Morrison and shares numerous biographical and behavioral similarities. When shown photos of Frank, 2 of Morrison's exes reportedly cried, convinced it was him. Finn also notes that Frank has a scar where Morrison had a mole, a similar facial structure, and a speech pattern eerily reminiscent of the singer's. Even more curious, Frank allegedly admitted to being on a swim team, something Morrison had also done, only to quickly walk it back. These small but strange clues formed the backbone of Finn's hypothesis. Adding more weight to that mystery is a photo of Frank with the Doors drummer John Densmore taken in 2013, and the inclusion of several former acquaintances of Morrison among Frank's online followers. In interviews, Frank had avoided giving decisive answers, saying simply, "If anybody could have pulled it off, it would be him." When asked straight whether he was Jim Morrison, he countered beautifully with a line from a Jimmy Cliff song, "We all are one, we are the same person." While far from conclusive, the evidence was enough to convince many viewers that something more than what has previously been accepted is going on. For the moment, it has no solid proof, yet the imaginations keep alive the theory that he is merely pretending to be dead. As circumstantial evidence, there is the deep culture as a faith. Jim Morrison is a symbol of rebellion and escape. It's the idea, whether he died tragically young or slipped away to live under the radar, that Jim Morrison might still be walking among us, which captures the minds of so many because it reflects our common inability to release a man who came to be the bright symbol of living life on one's own terms. In this regard, historians contend that Morrison was greatly intrigued by mythological stories of transformation and renewal, and often spoke of Dionysus, the Greek god of resurrection and chaos, in his poetry and performances. It would, therefore, be quite fitting to think of him symbolically dying in a very personal mythology. As music journalist David Fricka claimed, Jim wasn't just performing music, he was enacting a personal mythology. The Social Security clue. A startling twist in the ongoing saga of Jim Morrison's legacy emerged when a private investigator working with Jeff Finn discovered that Morrison's Social Security profile appears to still be active, more than 50 years after his reported death. This revelation came as part of Finn's investigative documentary Before the End, which set out to uncover what really happened to the Doors frontman. The expert stated that while bureaucratic delays in record updates can happen, it would be highly unusual for a deceased person's Social Security number, SSN, to remain active for half a century without triggering audits or red flags within federal systems. The investigator further traced the SSN's activity to the New York region, where Frank X, Jeff Finn's primary subject in the documentary, currently resides. As if this wasn't strange enough, Frank's SSN reportedly contains the digits 127, which Morrison's girlfriend Pamela Corson had once cryptically labeled on a box containing his personal writings. This seemingly arbitrary number suddenly took on deeper meaning, prompting Finn to suggest the possibility that Corson had hinted at a coded message about Morrison's plans or alias. These critics have claimed that Social Security data can be afflicted by clerical anomalies, especially for those before the computerized age of record-keeping. Yet the odd consistency of the details, along with the overwhelming circumstantial evidence surrounding Morrison's alleged death, makes an active status for his profile more than just a glitch. In other words, apart from contesting the lack of a death certificate filed with the U.S. government, which some sources state was never properly submitted, it may still be held to exist, at least bureaucratically, that Jim Morrison is alive. The implications of an ongoing SSN delve deeper than just fan theories. They confront the formal documentation and necessitate reassessment concerning the handling of Morrison's death. If his profile is active in government records, it implies either a spectacular administrative incompetence or the incredible consequence that someone has apparently been using that identity. Whether it leads to Morrison himself or someone else piggybacking on his name, the mystery only deepens and further dissolves the line between legend and truth. Even more sinister, however, is the well-known fascination of Morrison with myth and reinvention, which gives the idea of an intended disappearance almost frightful legitimacy. Morrison discussed his very desire in a number of interviews throughout his life about adhering by fame and leading an anonymous life as an anonymous poet. "I see myself as a huge, fiery comet, a shooting star," he once said. "Everyone stops, points up, and gasps, 'Oh, look at that!' Then, whoosh, and I'm gone." The theme of vanishing at the peak of notoriety flows through cultural history. Arthur Rimbaud, among Morrison's literary idols, abandoned fame for obscurity. On the same note, a social security profile of Morrison, so active, becomes much more than an example of clerical oddity. It symbolizes the tension between the mythical idea of disappearance and the bureaucratic proof that perhaps one never quite vanished at all. Yet what's even more fascinating than the clues are the powerful echoes Morrison left behind. Echoes that still ripple through generations. Legacy and enduring mystery. Jim Morrison's legacy endures not only because of his music, but also because of the lingering mystery surrounding his untimely death. As the frontman of The Doors, Morrison crafted a distinct presence in rock music with his hypnotic performances, philosophical lyrics, and fearless dive into dark, taboo themes. Songs like The End, People Are Strange, and Riders on the Storm remain cultural touchstones, celebrated for their poetic depth and haunting power. Though his career was cut short, Morrison's status as an icon of the 1960s counterculture and as a symbol of artistic rebellion has only grown stronger over the decades. In the years following his death, Morrison's mythic aura expanded. His gravesite at Paris's Père Lachaise Cemetery became a pilgrimage destination for fans from around the world, many of whom leave personal tributes, poems, and offerings. Anniversary gatherings, particularly the 20th and 50th, have drawn thousands, sometimes turning into chaotic scenes that reflect the fervent devotion surrounding his memory. Museums and cultural institutions have also honored Morrison's influence, reinforcing his position as a global artistic figure whose life and legacy continue to resonate across generations. Morrison's literary ambitions further add to his posthumous legend. In 2021, the collected works of Jim Morrison was published by his sister, Anne Morrison Tuning, offering a 600-page anthology of poetry, lyrics, and journals that painted a richer, more introspective portrait of the man behind the music. This collection helped challenge the stereotype of Morrison as merely a self-destructive rock star, revealing instead a thoughtful, troubled artist constantly grappling with existence, fame, and mortality. His writings reinforced his deep connection to the romantic and symbolist poets he so admired, from Rimbaud to Baudelaire. The uncertainty surrounding Morrison's demise has worked strongly in consolidating him as a cultural enigma due to the lack of autopsy, a sealed coffin, and a hasty funeral that immediately gave rise to speculation. Eventually, close friends and lovers started to drop hints regarding a possible secrecy behind his wrongful death. Ray Manzarek, The Doors' keyboardist, even went so far as to say that he thought Morrison had faked his death in order to escape the pressures of fame. According to ex-girlfriend Sally Stevenson, she remembered a conversation about her book in which a rock star fakes his death. Morrison probably cryptically whispered, "If you don't finish the book, I might steal your ending." Another ex, Ellen Sander, admitted to knowing a secret regarding Morrison's death, but refused to divulge it. These whispered confidences and lingering mysteries add fuel to the fire. Fans and conspiracy theorists alike still argue whether Morrison died in that bathtub in Paris or whether he disappeared to start a new life. And that is at least partly what makes Morrison so virulent in the popular imagination. That combination of artistic genius and mystery. Because the legacy is as much about what he left unfathomable as it is about what he created. In death, as in life, Jim Morrison ever defies easy explanation, and that enigma has become an inseparable part of the myth. If this mystery blew your mind, imagine what's coming next. Don't forget to like, drop a comment with your theory, and subscribe for more untold stories and deep dives. And hey, don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen to keep the story going. See you there.